American joining you and I now is Congressman Brad Wenstrup from the great state of Ohio. And Congressman, welcome again to the Bill Cunningham Show. I know from our past shows that we've done together that 9/11 had a profound impact in your life. Please explain your story. And we had 3,000 Americans that were murdered that day. They launched wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It cost about 7,000 American lives, and there were about 40,000 injuries. It was the defining moment, and every time 9/11 comes around, I always hear personal stories from people. What is your story of service when 9/11 occurred?
Well, it actually started before that day, if you think about it, because I joined the reserves in 1998 because we kept getting attacked. If you look through the history, whether it's in Beirut, Lebanon, or the USS Cole, you had all these incidents where America was getting attacked. And I just thought to myself, if we need to go somewhere, I would go. And that's what happened. I joined, and then 9/11 happened in 05, 06. I served as chief of surgery for Combat Support Hospital in Iraq, where we actually were treating the enemy. We had our troops, of course, but we sent them on to Germany and then to home, and it was one of the bloodiest times of war. And we took care of the enemy there, and it was a brutal time. And we took care of people that wanted to kill us, which is, the American way. But 9/11 is what really brought it on. And one of the guys that I served with in Iraq, we served together in the spring of 06. He was just there 3 months. But he went back in 08, and his name was John Pryor. John Pryor, MD. He joined the reserves after 9/11. On 9/11, as a trauma surgeon in Philadelphia, he said goodbye to his wife and kids and drove to Ground Zero to help take care of people.
Yeah.
And that inspired him to join the reserves. And then we served together. We even came to Cincinnati, my hometown, to do a trauma conference. And 2 years later, on Christmas Day, he was killed in Iraq by a mortar, and I miss him. So this day and the subsequent fallout means so much to me. I just recently attended a Green Beret Foundation dinner, and we had several of the wives who've lost their spouses and or struggled with them until they did die because from their wounds, and very moving. So it meant a lot, and a lot of lessons learned from this. Intelligence failures, I'd say, by the Clinton administration led to the rise of Osama bin Laden.
Sure.
If you read Buzz Patterson's book, who held the nuclear football for Clinton, he recently pointed out, in spite of all that's going on with the raid in Mar-a-Lago, he said, that Bill Clinton actually lost the codes to the nuclear football when he was president of the United States. And in that book, he also points out how President Clinton was being reached and said, we have bin Laden in our sights. We can take him out now. We need the go-ahead. And he pulled back and said no. So maybe a lot could have been avoided. There's a lot of lessons learned, how we deal with terrorism, how we try to protect ourselves from terrorism. And I just want to praise all the troops that have served in Iraq and Afghanistan and really around the world to prevent another terror attack on our soil. And I think there's a lot to be said for that in the last 20 years.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, you're a doctor, also one of the ones who saved the life of Stephen Scalise in assassination attempt of a leftist, Hoskinson, who made his way from Illinois. But I noticed this morning on some of the talk shows, they talked about the armed services are under stress. Number one, we're sending about $50 billion for hardware to Ukraine that recently, last few days, have had great success. But according to one general, it was one of the experts with Tucker Carlson a couple nights ago, about 40 to 60% of that hardware, no one knows where it is. It gets there, and then God knows what happens to it after that point. But they said it's very difficult to meet the enlistment goals, and that there's a different generation of Americans now that they need. Maybe the Marines might be meeting their goals. The Army and the Navy, the Air Force are not meeting their goals. And it's because the military has been torn down largely in the minds of the American people because of media coverage. You have Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, talking about number one problem is white rage. The other problem is climate change mitigation, which is a bunch of baloney. Those aren't the biggest problems facing this country. Have there been lessons learned from 9/11? Here we are about 21 years later that we're not really responding appropriately. And you're on various of the great committees in the House, including the Sensitive Intelligence Committee, that somehow we're sending so much equipment to Ukraine to fight the Russians that we're down so much stockpiles. So answer those 2 or 3 questions. Why? What are the lessons of 9/11? Secondly, how come we're not meeting the requirements of filling up the ranks? And thirdly, is America at risk now because of all the goods we provided to the Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot of discussion that could be held around a round table when you bring up all those issues. There are concerns within the military, and you can even go to the mandate for vaccinations for COVID. And, this is different than a polio vaccine or the other vaccines as we in the military had to take. Right now, the situation with COVID is different, and we may be throwing out people that have more immunity than people that have been vaccinated.
Right.
So and that makes no sense. And I recently, with other doctors in Congress, have sent forward to the Secretary of Defense and copying the President, the Surgeons General, and all those with military research to say, stop the mandate. We don't have people dying left and right from this thing right now.
No.
And why don't you do a study on all of our troops? Draw some blood. We do it all the time. Draw some blood, see where their antibody level is, see where their T cell level is, and see where this is common sense. And we can learn so much, not only for the military, but for the country and for the world on the effectiveness of the vaccines, the effectiveness of natural immunity, the problems with comorbidity. All these things can be learned. That's one thing. So when you see things like that being pushed down, that's really hurting our recruitment and retention at this time. There's no doubt about it. But also, it's people wondering what the military is becoming. So a lot of people may not want to join because if it's becoming some social experiment for the government as opposed to the military that's constitutionally authorized to protect and defend the United States of America and to be trained to do that at every level, then I think some people aren't so sure that this is the organization that they want to join. And then when you go to Ukraine, I think there's certainly arguable debates on what we're sending. Certainly we should know where our equipment's going, what it's being used for, what do we hope to see the end result be by providing it, not just here you go. But look, our government in so many ways has always just been throw more money at things, and that's not the right answer, and we need to have accountability for what's going on. But working closely with the Ukrainians, we should discover what they need and work with them militarily and make sure that what we are sending are the things that we need to deter and defeat Russia if they can. And certainly we don't want us to get into a World War III.
No.
And right now you have the Ukrainians fighting this war for democracy, fighting this war really for NATO. And that's 36 countries. What I get baffled by for the Russian people, they can't be happy right now. They can't be happy to see their sons and maybe daughters coming home in body bags. And they can't be happy that they were told this was going to be swift and we were going to be greeted with open arms. They can't be happy or proud of what's going on right now. I know they can't talk about it in their country, but they can't be. And so I think that helping them is something we want to do, but let's do it right and make sure that we are learning any lessons that we may be needing to learn. I was in Kyiv right before this all happened. I was there in December. And, this was a Western-type country, no doubt about it. They were ready for Christmas, but at the same time, meeting with their government and with their military, they were deeply concerned, and they wanted help, and they wanted help now. And unfortunately, the administration took the posture of not helping them. And even though we knew this was going to happen, the intelligence was actually good on what Russia was planning to do. We didn't do enough, and maybe we could have deterred it. And also what we don't want to have happen is have China think that, oh, look, U.S. isn't going to do anything. Maybe Europe's not going to do anything. We can probably walk right into Taiwan, too. And so, there is an effort to want us to deter the Chinese and their ambitions, which are very clear if you saw what has happened there and what happened with Hong Kong, which was not supposed to happen. And, this is, I think, another message. So it's multi-pronged. It's not just Ukraine. It's what's going to happen throughout Europe and hopefully avoid a World War III and hopefully keep China out of Taiwan.
You're out there on the campaign trail a little bit. I think the election coming up in about 8 weeks is the most important one of my lifetime. We say that all the time, but I can only imagine if the Democrats keep the House and keep the Senate, that people like Senator Ron Johnson doesn't win, that J.D. Vance doesn't win, that Dr. Oz doesn't win. Somehow Marco Rubio loses, and all of a sudden the Senate is going to have maybe 51, 53, 54 seats. And I'm watching this morning one of the morning shows, and Yamiche Alcindor, who works for NBC News, says the top issue in the minds of the voters is abortion. All the polling indicates, number one, the economy. Number two is energy. Number three is crime. Number four is the southern border. When you're out there, and abortion is one of those things that ought to be decided by the states. That's the brilliance of our federal system, which is a Republican small-arm form of government. When you're out there campaigning, are the big issues the economy, which is jobs and supply chain? You still can't buy baby formula, and crime happening, whether it's Memphis or Cincinnati or Los Angeles, and the southern border, in which in the last year and a half, about 4 million illegals have come across. And then, of course, energy right now, gasoline is down from all-time high, but everyone says at the end of the year it's going to skyrocket again. Does anyone bring up to you the idea that abortion, like NBC News says, is the biggest issue in the country, and not the economy, not crime, not the southern border, and not energy?
Well, it's interesting. You know, if you go back 2 years ago, Republicans were supposed to lose 15 seats in the House. Hillary Clinton was supposed to win dramatically. In both of those cases, those polls in particular, are wrong. We're doing polling as well. It's not showing that abortion is the number one issue. I think sometimes if you poll within an echo chamber, and Republicans could be guilty of this from time to time too, but and how you word the question makes a difference in the outcome of a poll. So I don't put much stock in it, but I can tell you when I'm out and about, it's not the number one issue on most people's minds. And I think the people that are making abortion the number one issue are never going to vote for Republicans anyway, and never have. And so I think that they also, maybe some are starting to understand that what the Supreme Court did is not what the mainstream media and Democrats tell them, which is that you can no longer get an abortion. And what they said was this belongs in the states because there's nothing in the Constitution about it. You know, it's just sad to me as a person that has so much respect for life at all stages, that there is this much anger, or at least it's a loud voice, but I don't know that it's really a majority necessarily. But I mean, what it comes down to is that people are mad that they may have to go to another state to kill their baby. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, and it's kind of sad in that way. Yep. And I've always been one. We want to help the mothers too. We want to make sure a mother in distress is taken care of in some way, shape, or form, and we do that with perinatal care and everything else. Those are at least my goals as a physician in Congress, to make America healthy. But I just don't believe that that's the main issue. I do think it's the economy. And you know, let's not forget, gas has come down. It's from our strategic reserve, which this is not the emergency that the strategic reserve is supposed to be for. The problem we're using the strategic reserve is from self-inflicted wounds when we shut down the Keystone Pipeline and make it very difficult to go out and basically harvest new oil, a natural resource that God has given us. And so I think that that's part of the problem. So gas prices, all of a sudden gas is important to Democrats, and the price of gas is important because election's coming up. Well,
the other thing, I'm watching one of the morning shows, I think it was CBS, and there was a correspondent, or maybe it was a producer off camera, that was so happy that they had a sonogram, and they were wanting to get a boy, and this was on the news part of CBS Morning News. And she wanted a boy. She had two girls, and she had a boy. Brought in the sonogram, and you can tell, you know, I've gone through some family members with sonograms. You see the little stem, or you don't see the little stem. You kind of know a boy or a girl. And it was at about the 20th week, about 4.5 to 5 months into the deal. And here's the baby. And at that moment, little baby was sucking his little thumb, and it was a boy, and they were real happy. And I would have asked the question, hey, Mom, do you think that's medical waste? Are you looking at medical waste, or is that a person? Right. Is that a baby? And she would say, well, that's a baby. I already have the baby name picked out, waiting for the baby to be born. And so for the left wing who says that's medical waste, I watched this morning. Chuck Todd interviewed Kamala Harris. Not one tough question was asked about any issue, whether it was abortion, whether it was the failure in Afghanistan, which 2 weeks ago we commemorated the sacrifice of 13 troops there. Nothing about the southern border. Biden's never been there. It was all softballs from Chuck Todd. I would have said to her, at what moment do you think a baby in utero has rights? Is it the 4th month, the 5th month? Is it the first minute? Is it 9 months? And you never get to the point. And you're a doctor and a congressman, Brad Wenstrup. Is that a baby or is that medical waste? According to the CBS correspondent, I'm sure voting Democratic, she said, that's my boy. Is it a boy or is it medical waste?
Yeah, that's a boy, and it's a human boy, and it could be a girl. It really doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that fetus has different chromosomes than the mother who's carrying that child. And so, I always look at that as a unique and individual and dependent life, human life, at several points. The point of viability keeps getting smaller and smaller, where we can keep a baby alive outside the womb. But to me, from conception, that is its own individual, unique human being that's in the process of growing, as is any child that is delivered.
Unbelievable. Well, I know. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, Brad Wenstrup. And I knew you had joined the military a couple of years before 9/11. You were in Iraq dealing with the consequences. We left Iraq in a terrible way. George Bush, the Bush 43, told me in an interview like in 03, 04, we're going to find out whether it was successful in 10 or 15 years. If freedom's flag, he said, is flying in Baghdad. And this was after the elections, people running around with purple ink on their finger. We know it would have been a great deal. Well, here we are. Some 20 years later, after Afghanistan and Iraq, we can see that the policy failures were incredible, that many sacrificed their lives and gave everything they had. Some gave a little, but some gave all, and it was sad how it turned out. But once again, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. With your permission, we'll do it again. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Bill.